Squid Game is easily one of the most watched shows worldwide in recent years. But if you made it through Season 3, have you stopped to think about how many details you completely missed while your attention was locked onto the adrenaline of the games? For instance, a lot of people didn't notice that the letters on the dormitory walls, only clearly visible once the beds were removed, weren't random at all. If you look closely, they actually form a Latin phrase, Hodi mihi cras tibi. If your observation level is anything like PeekBlast's, you might have caught that this exact phrase was on the warehouse wall, but do you know what it means? Those 4 words are Latin, and they literally translate to today, me, tomorrow you. And if that sounds a little creepy, that's completely intentional. These words were traditionally found at the entrances of cemeteries in ancient Rome. They served as a chilling reminder that death is always lurking around the corner. Basically, it's the same vibe as in the series. If you're not eliminated now, you're probably next. Backing up this graveyard connection is the large central mural in the background of that same room. At first glance, it might look like a giant chessboard, but look again, it's not a chessboard at all. It's actually a cemetery filled with crosses. The black squares are open graves. It's a brutal but clear message to the players. This is where you're headed. And yet, the greed of most contestants always led them to vote for the games to continue. And we can't ignore the drawings on the sidewalls, those eerie stick figures dangling and swinging around. If you look closely, they're all heading directly toward the drawing of the cemetery. This reinforces what the frontman thinks of each contestant, that they're walking willingly toward their own certain death. And they just can't stop, all for money. That's it. And here's the kicker. Above the cemetery drawing, we see the same triangle structures the stick figures were swinging from, but none of the figures are hanging there anymore. That likely means they've already fallen, straight into one of the graves. It's deep symbolism, right? And yet 99% of Squid Game fans never noticed this, or the many other hidden details we're about to break down in this video. Ready to blow your mind and spot these with us? At one point in Season 3, Wubuk, the former right-hand man of the loan shark who used to lend money to Guhan, starts suspecting that Captain Park, the man leading the search boat, is actually working with the people behind the games. He breaks into the captain's house and starts searching for proof, and if you pause at just the right moment, you'll spot something interesting. He picks up a pink and white card, the exact colors of the show's logo. As we pointed out in previous videos about the earlier seasons, the show's director filled Season 2 with pink and white hidden items, and here it is again in Season 3, another carefully placed Easter egg. Later, when Wubuk finds a stash of cash and the staff uniforms, we learn something else. The symbol on the mask that Captain Park wore when working inside the games was a square. That tells us he was in a high-ranking position in the twisted hierarchy. No wonder the front man trusted him, and why Park had a direct line to him whenever needed. Oh, and that also explains his friendship with the recruiter, which Wubuk confirms after finding a photo of them fishing together. That picture is what seals his suspicions. A recurring Easter egg throughout the first seasons was the sneaky use of the show's iconic symbols, the circle, triangle, and square. In Season 3, spotting all 3 together outside the game area was much harder, but we did find at least one clear instance. There's a drone flying over Captain Park's boat just as the Coast Guard is getting too close to the island, forcing an emergency evacuation. Here's another detail that very few people noticed. It happens when No EUL, the guard who helps player 246 escape, goes to the frontman's archivist and looks for the book containing information about the player she's trying to save. We can clearly see that she finds his file in Book 2, which shows that each binder contains data about players whose numbers range from 200 to 299. And here's proof. The moment she opens the book, we quickly get a glimpse of Thanos, the rapper and drug user who joined the games but met an even worse fate during Season 2. You definitely remember him and his bright purple hair. But to actually see his face, you need to pause the scene at just the right second, just like we did. Thanos was player 230, which confirms that this binder only contained players whose numbers fell within the 200s. Another creepy surprise in that same scene actually happens a few seconds earlier, while No Eul is still trying to find the archivist's room. She opens a door and sees something extremely bizarre. There's a mannequin dressed in a suit and wearing an owl-shaped mask made entirely out of shiny gemstones. That mask and outfit are identical to the ones worn by the game master who handed the dagger to the frontman, back when he himself was just a contestant in that edition of the games. But the creepiest part isn't even the mannequin. It's what's beside it, sitting almost as if still alive, is Il-nam, the very same player 001 from the edition Guhan 1. And unlike what most people thought, that wasn't some wax statue. It was actually Il-nam himself, taxidermied. That was probably one of his final wishes before dying. It also proves what most fans already suspected. He was the same person hiding behind that sparkling owl mask. This was just an extra confirmation for anyone who still hadn't caught on. If you made it this far, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We totally earned it, right? Another detail from Season 3 that confused a few fans was why Guhan didn't stab the frontman when they were alone and he had the dagger in hand. The thing is, if he had done that, the dagger would have been taken from him, and he'd be sent back into the game completely defenseless. And as we saw in the final episode, he actually needed that dagger to protect the baby girl. Still talking about the dagger, we find out at the beginning of episode 5 that it's the exact same dagger Il-nam once gave to the front man. But that's not all. We also learned that he used that dagger to eliminate every other contestant competing in that edition of the games. And if you count carefully, you'll see that aside from the frontman, there were 5 others. 6 in total. That's fewer than the number who survived in this second edition we watched, where 9 made it to the end, including the baby. But it's more than the survivors from the first edition that Guhan participated in, where only 3 remained in the end. Back to talking about Il-nam, the founder of the games, at least in the South Korean edition, we find out that the VIPs attending this season all knew him as President O, which is actually his first name. But at the same time, it's clear that these VIPs are not the same ones we saw in Season 1. It's a subtle detail, but it supports the idea that these deadly games might happen annually, and that there's a rotating guest list of psychopathic billionaires who pay to watch these horrific spectacles. It also hints at the possibility that the games are held in different countries. In fact, by the end of the season, we see the frontman in a car driving through Los Angeles, and we witness a woman recruiting players, likely for the American edition of the Twisted games. On top of that, we can assume the VIPs come from very different countries, representing regions all around the globe. One of them says Mamma Mia, which most likely means he's Italian.
Mamma mia.
Another VIP, the only woman among them in this season, is seen at one point speaking an Asian language that's definitely not Korean. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe she's speaking Japanese. If you think otherwise, feel free to tell us in the comments.
与其跟你喝酒，我倒不如跟我的脚凳子喝。
Speaking of the VIPs, one more detail that reappears from previous seasons is the living furniture. Yes, people fully painted and forced to stay completely still, while serving as ottomans, side tables, and even cup holders. They show up in multiple scenes, and the female VIP, who we think is from Japan, even takes one of those human slaves back to her room. Another disturbing display of the soulless extravagance of these filthy rich monsters. There's also a very touching and symbolic moment in Season 3 that deserves a mention. When Junhee dies, right before we see her lifeless body on the ground, we notice that Guhan placed the baby girl on a surface covered in flowers. Then, as we see Junhee, we notice the floor she's lying on is also painted with a lot of flowers, creating a visual parallel between mother and daughter. It's a dramatic moment that shows how she gave her life so her child could live, and how they'll always be connected in spirit. In the final game, take a closer look at the pillar structures that feature the symbols from Squid Game. They're visibly worn down. This proves that the facility has been around for many years, confirming what fans have always suspected. These games have likely been happening once a year for decades. It really makes you wonder, how has the government never noticed that so many people just disappear year after year? At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if the organization behind the games has someone working inside the National Statistics Department. To wrap it up, here's a fun little detail we thought was pretty cool. When Wubuk is finally arrested by the police, after a lot of insistence, he manages to get an officer to pick up his phone. And if you pause the scene at just the right moment when he tries to unlock the screen, you'll see the exact time it is, 3:42 in the morning. Honestly, I thought it was earlier than that. What about you? Since we know you love videos full of references, hidden details, and Easter eggs, we're dropping 2 awesome ones right here so you can keep hanging out with us. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.